Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Salatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Anbiya'i wal Mursaleen. Allahumma alimna ma yanfa'una. وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا بفضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. Okay, Bismillah. So, um, who can tell me two things they can learn from this quote?
Recording in progress.
Two things you can learn from this quote. Sorry.
The idea of a madhab precedes the four imams.
So somebody says the Salaf did not follow madhahib. Is that true or false?
False.
False.
Okay, how do you know that? Where's a quote? Whose quote is this?
Ali al-Madini is
Ali Medini. Who's Ali Medini? That's one of your Sufi
teacher.
Ashari Salaf Khalafi shuyukh, right?
No, he's the teacher of al-Bukhari, right?
Teacher of Imam Bukhari, right? And he's quoting Al-Masruq, one of the Tabi'een, who says, and literally using the word يَذْهَبُونَ مَذْهَبَهُ, they would follow their way, they would follow the madhab. So is it true that the Salaf did not have madhabs? No. So that's a lie. It's not a lie, it's just inaccurate, right? The Salaf did not have madhabs, not true, right? It's not. That's not a true thing. So I want to be like the Salaf. They didn't follow madhahib. Yes, they did. We did. Okay, number one. Number two, what does that tell us then? Muhammad Shaman, you mentioned it. Can you just rephrase the point?
The idea of a madhab, does it precedes the four imams? And
Good. So you say the Shafi'i school began with Imam Shafi'i. Is that actually true?
no,
It's not true.
the
Right.
imams were pivotal points, but they're not.
Right. So it's like saying coding began with when did coding begin, Muhammad?
It's hard to say, Sheikh, because it's
Thank you very much. It's hard to say. So coding, you say, there was this one day when like Python was born. Like, no, that's what you're talking about. It's not true. Okay, so like there's all these stages that lead up, natural things that lead up to this, which lead up to this, which lead to this. I guess, first manipulation of electricity, right? Maybe. When they, what's it called? They electrocuted the frog and said, electricity is life, maybe. That's a stage in it, right? That's a stage in things. Maybe it can go back to change the way we looked at science and nature. Maybe we can go fast forward and start talking about what's it called? What's the name? Turing and stuff like that. Maybe we can fast forward and say something else, but you can't pinpoint it. So you ask anybody in a specialization, when did that first start? And it's like, well, everything's a natural product of a civilization, right? That's the key point there. Fantastic. Okay, okie dokie. We mentioned that diagram. That's that key quote there. Da, 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 da. Okay. What does this mean? No, not this one. Yeah, we could do this. Here we go. This key quote, what does it mean?
The madahib are the result of much discussion, much focus, much organization into scholarly opinions.
Okay. Where did you get that from?
This idea that nomenclatures have been refined and disciplines have been arranged. That means that the sorting of information, Sheikh, is not by accident. It's taken time and taken a lot of people's work.
Okay. So Is that something unique to the Shafi school?
No. Just saying that this is something that is part of the madahib and just the study of Islamic
Okay,
knowledge.
is it unique to fiqh?
No.
No.
No, it's just part of the natural civilization. This thing called Islam civilization, right? All of these things. Um, sorry guys, I'm a bit distracted. There's 4 cute little 3-month-old kittens next to me. I'm trying to add them to the class, but it's not working. So they're just attending. They're taking notes in their own special way. Okay, what are you looking at? One of them is looking at us now. 3 of them are trying to do something else. But anyway, sorry about that. So it's just a normal, natural thing. So question. So here I come along and say the Salaf did not follow madhabs. Yes, they did. The madhabs are great, but no cigar. Like they need to be rehashed and revisited. Is that true? Scholarly discernments have reached a level that cannot be exceeded. Historian quote, right? So marketplaces, there was a supply and demand for such a long time for fiqh solutions that fiqh has reached this level. Here's a discussion right now, just chapter right now. What is a whole chapter in Rawdat al-Talibin by Imam Nawawi on the nature of what does it mean to like hand something over? So there's enough discussions there that I can now talk about what does it mean to like when you deliver something, what does it delivering mean? What does payment mean? Like, oh, the payment was received. What do you mean by that? Hours and hours and hours and hours of discussions about what it means for a payment to be made, what it means for a delivery to happen. What does it mean to deliver goods? What is the very definition of that? And what about this scenario? What about that scenario? And someone says this, and someone says, no, you don't know what you're talking about. And they go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, because we all care about doing trade in an Islamic way. So have I delivered the goods? Have I not delivered the goods? Have I paid? Have I not paid? Have I provided you the premises in an accessible way? What does accessible mean? Right? So it is not like there was no demand, nor there was any research, nor was there no discussion. It's happened for a long time. Your concept makes sense. Perhaps they didn't know everything, but it's not actually true. They did know everything, and they did discuss everything, right? So it is a super robust system that has been edited. Any objection that you could have has already been brought up, and that doesn't make you wrong. It doesn't make it wrong, but it's just there's already a question for that, right? And there's already an answer for that. So don't imagine that it hasn't happened yet. So today you come along and say, "Oh, that's true, but there's a hadith like this." You're like, nobody's discussed the hadith before, honestly. Actually, what's happened is that hadith has been discussed 5,000 times. Everything that you've said, we've already said. Right? Everything you've said, we've already said. And so it's a mute point. It's not useful. You know? It's like walking into an ER department and say, well, when you bring someone back to life with that shock, isn't that dangerous? Duh, like as if we never discussed that before. Like we've never discussed the idea of is it dangerous or not? That would be ridiculous. Like, oh, have you discussed the dangers of electrocuting somebody? It's like, well, what do you mean? Of course we've discussed the dangers of electrocuting people, right? Like, how could you know? Or have you not discussed? Didn't you know that chemotherapy is dangerous? Like, of course you know that it's dangerous. Like, what are you talking about? So it's a silly point. Someone comes along and says, I don't think democracy is good because the laity is not educated enough. You don't think people discuss that in political theory? Like, we've been just talking about democracy for how long? Since Plato. Like, you think that nobody's discussed that issue, the necessity of education, how important education is to the success of democracy? Like, you think like your objection has never been raised before? You're that intelligent and everyone else is that dumb, right? And so it's not saying that you shouldn't follow that discussion. It's an important discussion. You might find something fruitful. But the assumption that my objection is a new objection and it's a new angle that no one's ever thought of, that's not true. Because so many people have been discussing for such a long time that all of your discussions have already been raised anyway, right? So we've already agreed to disagree. It may seem strict to you. It may seem strange to you, but it's not that no one's questioned it. Does that make sense? or it's not that we know this hadith was not there, right? So again, the premise is Imam Shafi didn't know everything and everybody blindly followed him. I'm not following Imam Shafi and nobody blindly followed him. So your whole premise is wrong. Like the night of the living dead. I put them in one corner and then they follow me again. Any tactics on killing zombies or kitten zombies? No. Not enough supply and demand, not enough demand for the tactics. Okay. Anyway, so it makes sense, inshallah. So the idea that that fiqh is something that is new and needs to be revised. It's not true. That's not the case. Here's a historian living, 600 years ago saying that's not the case. Like, look at it. Look at the world, right? We've done this to bits already. Okay. Faculties are physical regardless of whether they exist in the body or the mind and therefore require instruction. What's this? What do we learn from this?
True learning begins with the teacher.
This is why every education in every discipline requires and recognized. So can I just do this by myself? No. Right? We just say just Quran and Sunnah. I want to learn it by myself. Yes, learn Quran and Sunnah through a mature system with a specialist. Right? So now this is another thing. So we have Salafism, which is forget the form of madhahib, just follow Quran and Sunnah. Wrong. Or another approach is we follow all form of madhahib. That's fine. That's no problem, right? We shouldn't be biased. All form of madhahib. He's on my toe now. Sorry. On both toes. Both feet now. What do you want? So we just follow everything. That's fine, right? I mean, like imagine, for example, where do you pay taxes, Sham? You pay taxes in New York or in California? Like eating my toe. Go ahead, yeah.
Sorry, I pay taxes in New York.
In New York. So are they different? Is it different? He's licking my feet. Yeah, go ahead. Is there a difference between taxes in California and taxes in New York?
Absolutely. Every state has different taxes, and then
Do
some
you
states.
do you personally care?
No, because I'm screwed no matter what. I'm going to fund the war in Israel no matter what.
Okay, so you don't really care. You don't have any particular loyalty to the Californian tax system versus the New York system. In fact, if you could have an offshore business that provides educational services to university and not pay any tax, it'd be great. Like you don't really care as long as it works and as long as you're not going to get done in by the IRS, correct?
Correct.
Right. Same thing. I don't know anything about madhahib. I don't really care. I have a Lord. I just want to worship him in a solid way. Spare me the details, just give me the upshot, right? Most people are like that. I don't really care which madhab it is, right? So that's totally fine to just follow any valid position, as long as it's valid, as long as it's like, this is backed up by real knowledge, real critical thinking. I don't really care. I don't need even to be academically consistent, right? Well, the Hanafi conclusion is based on this principle. The Shafi concluded this principle. You're being inconsistent. It doesn't really matter because the big picture is I'm doing something right. The problem is now when you say I follow form of madhahib, right? That you will then have somebody teaching you who doesn't actually understand the form of madhahib. Because you probably don't know the form of madhahib. You're probably, right? So when you have a jack of all trades, master of none, you have a problem. Right? You have a problem. So now, for example, this is another thing which is you'll see a prevalent thing in the Middle East today and other places. You go to university and you study fiqh of zakat, and it is not madhab specific. Why should I not be madhab specific? Argument number one, the Salaf didn't follow madhahib. Argument number two, the madhahib need to be reviewed. Argument number three, let's be pluralistic, right? So now we're not talking about being narrow-minded, nor are we talking about or saying that we don't follow the madhahib, but so yeah, just follow all four madhahib, right? So this is quite a cool trend now, in the West and for many Muslims. Yeah, just follow the four madhahib in general. Where's your problem? The problem is you need to have four specialists then, right? So as analogy, right? The BJJ guy just down the road, Muhammad Shaman, just from down the masjid, Ricardo, I don't know if you know him. I spoke to him, and he said, MMA is it's a tough game, right? So it's really difficult. You need to have a weight specialist, you need to have a grappling specialist, you need to have a sparring specialist, you need to have a kickboxing specialist, you need to have somebody also to like help you connect all the things. It's pretty difficult. It's very expensive. And so if you're winning, it's great. If you're losing, it's like crippling. Like you owe all these people a ridiculous amount of money. It's very, very hard. So that's the same thing. You follow the form of madhahib in general, you now need like four specialists. But you don't have a specialist. You have Sheikh so-and-so who is neither this nor that. Does that make sense? So the problem is now you are going to a cardiologist who is not actually a cardiologist. He's just a general doctor, general practitioner, right? So he's not actually a cardiologist. So now you're asking a question that needs to be answered by a cardiologist, and he's answering it even though he's not a specialist. And he's not actually a specialist in any of these madhahib. So Sheikh Dr. Ramadan Bulti, he said, Allah madhabiyya qantarat Allah diniyya. Not following the four madhahib is the bridge that leads to no deen. Because if I don't know the Shafi school, and you don't know the Maliki school properly, and he doesn't know the Hanbali school properly, and he doesn't know the Hanafi school properly, if none of us know any of the systems properly, we actually don't know anything. Right? If I did a week of Python, a week of C++, a week of C++, a week of something else, do I know anything? No, I actually can't do anything. I'm not a specialist in anything. I actually can't do anything. And so yes, you would have no deen. Does that make sense? You follow me, guys?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yes.
So you come along, I'll give you an example. Somebody comes along and there's a hadith in Sahih Muslim that says it's for Prophet ﷺ firmly forbade selling cats. Okay. So then you say, oh, khalas, the Shafi school just follows Sahih hadith, so it should be haram in the Shafi school to follow sell cats. Right? So you're not actually an initiate. You haven't had true training in the Shafi school, so you don't know how we interact with that hadith. Okay? Now somebody comes along and says, no, I do. Look, I'm quoting the Majmu' of Imam an-Nawawi. And it says that it's makruh and not haram to sell cats in the Shafi school. Then I come along a generation later as a specialist and I hang on a minute, I open the Rawda Talibin, also by Imam an-Nawawi, and it's not really clear, is it makruh or not to sell cats? Is it permissible or is it makruh? It's not clear. It's definitely not haram. Now I go Zakaria Ansari, Shaykh al-Islam Zakaria Ansari, and I'm looking there and he mentions two opinions. What is the relied upon position? So if I don't now dig and dig and dig in the Shafi school and use my training to find out what is the actual Shafi school, then I don't know what the Shafi school actually says about that hadith. Now, if I don't know what the Shafi school says about the hadith, and you don't know what the Hanafi school says, and he doesn't know what the Maliki school says, and she doesn't know what about the Hanbali school, then there's no deen. Does that make sense? And so you will see this
Yes.
big international websites, right? Even my own teachers, Iftat department in Jordan, right? Exposing my own teachers, right? Sheikh Dr. Ahmed Hassanat, the Grand Mufti of Jordan. There it is. Look on the website. Iftat department in Jordan, it says it's offensive to sell cats in the Shafi school, and there it is in the Majmu'. I'm not actually convinced that's correct. How did that happen? How did it happen that's not convinced that's correct? Because in Jordan, Dr. Ahmed Hassanat himself, he studied Shafi fiqh, of course, privately, but university, the BA is not in Shafi fiqh. The MA is not in Shafi fiqh. It's just general. So they're very good at being generalists, but not good at being specific. So I'm not actually convinced that's correct. I'm going to have to research it properly. Right? And so can you see the difference? Like if I don't know my thing properly, is a problem. So there's nothing wrong with following 4 different madhahib. There's nothing wrong with that. The issue is, educationally, If nobody is specialized in any of the former madhahib specifically, you have a huge problem. Because I'm going to misquote your madhab, you're going to misquote my madhab, and it's all over the place. I've seen another one of my teachers, and I'm not trying to disparage them, I'm just trying to say the reality of it. The reality of the situation is people can't do that. You can't actually specialize in the former madhab. So if somebody is, they say he's Sheikh so-and-so, you say, which madhab does he follow? He says, no, I don't follow madhab because A, the Salaf didn't follow madhab, or B, we should be pluralistic. You got a problem. The Salaf did have a madhab, A, and B, you can be pluralistic, but you also have to have specialization. Right? And if you're not specialized, you don't know anything. Sham, do you teach any general classes at college?
Yes, sir.
What do you teach? What's the general class you teach?
Political science with a focus on refugee resettlement.
Okay, but so half of it is just political science in general, right? I don't know about a general undergrad class.
Yes, American politics, Western tradition, etc.
Okay, so it's very general, right? So that there's certain things that basically certain educational goals are supposed to come out with that. It doesn't really matter that you're not a specialist in you know in the colonial period of American history. That's not a problem, right? That you haven't written 15,000 essays in it and you're not published in it. That doesn't matter because it's a general thing, right?
Correct.
So that's like you giving a general introduction to Islam to I don't know, people in Russia, right? They're just like, oh yeah, he's a Muslim, he's practicing Muslim, let's talk to him. He's like, yeah, this is my life as a Muslim. It's great. It's a general class. But when you get to the specifics, like, oh, I need a specialist, right? So now so you're not going to do a master's in American history with Dr. Sham. Why would you do that? Does it make any sense? Now he might be there to check certain things, right? But that's not his specialization. So everyone has a specialization. This is the world, right? This is how it functions. You do not take your what's it called? Your bleeding thumb to a tailor. Tailors fix clothes. They don't fix fingers. Specialization, right? This is the basics of division of what's it called? The social contract and division of labor and specialization, right? This is the basics of civilization. So can you understand when you go to a sheikh and you say, Sheikh, is this halal or haram? It says halal, and it's like there's no madhab reference. What you're doing is you are untying the structure of civilization. No civilization works like that. Be it in education, be it in healthcare, be it in technology, be it in construction. Nobody does that. Right? Nobody does that. There was the brother Muhammad Anwar, Muhammad Shaman, the elderly Afghan brother in the masjid. He said this. He said, when you, what's wrong? When you do construction, when you do as a construction outside of California, when you come into California, you have to do everything new because they have many different standards to do because of the different types of woods and the moisture and the kind of problems they have. So there's somebody who's like, you're specialized, right? My friend, he has a whatever a JCD is called, like a PhD in law. I don't know what it's called, but like it's in not in business law, not in American business law, but New York business law specialization, right? And he wouldn't even be that good because he's not even trained in the field probably. He can lecture on it, but he's not actually a lawyer, right? So see how we function in life? We function in life with specialists. That's how society works. That's how civilization works. The same thing. You go to a sheikh, which madhab? The deen of Allah. Right? That's not an answer. It's not an answer. So when you say halal, haram, it's always madhab specific, and it is only through being trained specifically in that madhab with a specialist in the system. You don't have to agree or disagree, that's fine. I don't follow the Shafi school in everything in my life. I am not a hardcore Shafi at all, right? But there's a difference between I know what it's saying and why it's saying and what it means and what it doesn't mean versus I'm just a generalist. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So whenever you take halal and haram, it cannot be from a generalist because it's not going to work, right? Make sense? So if you're not specialized in one of the four madhahib, don't talk about fiqh. Khalas, go talk about something else.
Can I ask a question?
Listen, go ahead.
What is your opinion, Sheikh, about
when you hear people say things like, oh, I went to so-and-so because they have ijaza. Only if this person has ijaza can I go and get knowledge from them.
No, that makes sense. It makes sense in general. So what it means then is this education, wide education is in every discipline relies on the recognized teachers who are considered authoritative by everybody. That's called ijaza. The issue is it formal or informal? Okay, so for example, you have a formal ijaza in teaching certain level of education. You have a PhD. Like I'm going to start a university. There's a criterion, right, in different educational systems, but I'm gonna this university is now going to issue a PhD, but none of the lecturers have a PhD. Like that's a problem, right? Like nobody overseeing this academic process actually has ijaza in that, right? It's the same idea, and in fact, evidence has shown that the whole people researching that the whole master's PhD process comes from the ijaza system in reality. So that's what we're talking about, ijaza. Now, is it formal or informal? Right? Formal or informal? Formal is like this. You have a piece of paper, right? Like if you look at the beginning of the Reliance of Traveler, there's like literally like a formal ijaza written for Sheikh Nuh Kella to translate this, and he did this, signed by so-and-so. And he's trying to make a point, like you can't just have some punk turn up and say, I know stuff, right? But there's also informal ijaza, right? So for example, when Sheikh Amjad Rashid, one of my teachers, when he went to Yemen, they didn't give ijazas. So he's there teaching, lecturing, debating with the shuyukh. 11 years he has this very deep connection with a particular sheikh and debate, and it's a real education, but there's no ijaza. So when he came back to Jordan, one of the shuyukh in Jordan said, get him to write an ijaza for you, because when you come back to Jordan, everyone's going to say, hey, you don't have an ijaza, you don't count. Right? So they wanted something, a formal ijaza versus an informal ijaza. Okay? That's like, are you black belt, first dan, second dan, or are you just recognized as a master of martial arts? Does that make sense? So presumably back in the day when they first started karate or whatever it was, they didn't have black belt on these things, right? It's kind of like, are you a master or not? What is it? Kung Fu Panda. Have you become, are you, he's kind of like gets ijaza, what, the end of the first one, is it? I don't know, like he kind of cracks it, right? Like cracking something. But does he get a formal ijaza? I don't think so, right? I think it's like a formal thing. You are now the, what is it? The dragon, what's it called? What's it called? Whatever he becomes, Po in Kung Fu Panda. Guys don't watch enough, people, you don't watch enough TV, right? You need to make sure you have a wird, right? Every day, at least 4 hours of TV. Inshallah. What do you want?
We need Sheikh.
Now, the mama cat wants. What do you want? What do you want? She's here now. I don't know what she wants. The whole. Where are they? Where are your kittens? Yeah. Where's everybody else? Oh, they're here. Okay. Okay. Makes sense, guys. Okay, great. So key quote there. This is all review, right? Dragon Warrior. Jazakumullah khair. Thank you. Not Dragon Knight. Dragon Warrior. Okay. These two diagrams. What does this mean? Explain this diagram.
As years go, it will be more. It will be more standardized, the fiqh and the knowledge.
Okay. So notice the quote that I was just mentioning to you. Here's a hadith that talks about selling a cat. What does it mean? What does it not mean? Is it sahih? Is it not sahih? So notice, maybe a decade or a century or so after Bukhari and Muslim, suddenly there's this authority of Bukhari and Muslim. Before that, there's just nebulous hadiths and nebulous hadith narrators, and right? Afterwards, there's more authority. So as time goes on, the same scholarship is happening, but it becomes more authoritative. Somebody now critiques Bukhari and Muslim, and then there has a rebuttal on Bukhari on the critique, etc. Goes back and forward, right? What does it mean? What does it not mean, right? So if you read Imam Nawawi, he mentions 3 explanations of this hadith, 3 ways that they're either A, B, or C, but it's kind of like vague. Which one are you actually adopting? He agrees that it's not haram to sell cats, but it is makruh, or it seems makruh. So notice that's 700 years after the Prophet ﷺ, right? And now 900 years after the Prophet ﷺ, still there's kind of like there's this answer and that answer, right? So now as a scholar or as a researcher, I'm going to go, what's the next generation? How did they sift it out, right? How did they weigh it up and say, well, this is the correct answer, right? In the time of so you have the nebulous answers of the Kufans, then you have the positions of Imam Abu Hanifa and Qadi Abu Yusuf, Imam Muhammad, and then the next generation sifts out who's right and who's wrong, and who means this and who means that. And then somebody rejects that position, and then they go back and forward, and as time progresses, authority increases. Okay? What about this? What's happening here?
The numbers of opinions will decrease because they are editing and refining and criticizing the old opinions to a point
So
where
are certain opinions being kicked out?
yes.
Yeah. Do we become do we all agree on one answer though? Is there actually, does this ever get to zero?
No, not zero.
No. So there's less pluralism. Over time, there's more authority. This is the actual answer, and less pluralism. So you look at the earlier books, they say there's two answers on this. Okay, which is the right one? I mean, there's two answers. Like Imam Shafi himself in the he'll say there's this answer and this answer. Okay, well, which is the right answer? Right? Doesn't give an answer. So you will see Imam Malik, for example, in the Muwatta, he says that the strongest position that I've heard is that the verse in Surah Al-Waqi'ah, "La yamassuhu illa al-mutahharun," means you can't touch the mushaf without wudu. Notice he says the strongest answer that I've heard. So in his time, up here, maybe some people are saying, yeah, you can touch the mushaf without wudu. Over time, there's more authority, right? And less answer. So here, right now we're here, there's one opinion on that within the form of Dahib. Can you touch a mushaf without wudu? No. Can you carry? A bit more of a debate. Does a phone count as mushaf? Bit of a debate. But notice, so the difference of opinion decreases. Does it break your wudu if you touch your armpit? Like what? Like that sounds crazy to us today, but there were debates on that, right? Does the fast begin at Fajr or does the fast begin at sunrise? Right? That's nuts. Today we all agree. Khalas with, right? So there might be points that we agree to disagree. So this gap here, how much agreement will sometimes go down to zero, meaning we all agree on this, and sometimes would be 4 different answers or 5 different answers, 6 different answers. Right? There are actually more than one answer in each madhab. Right? So we may have, but it's definitely like this. When the further you go back, the more open it is. Right? And the less authority is. There's a fatwa, and it's like that's kind of funny. Right? Abdullah Mas'ud said this, but the Kufans themselves, the heirs of his fiqh didn't even accept it. Right? It happens. Make sense?
Yes.
So who was it?
Yes.
One of the Khulafa. One of the Khulafa, he said to Imam Malik, he said, make a madhab that it doesn't have the weird positions of Ibn Abbas and the strict positions of Ibn Umar and something else, the odd positions of Abdullah Mas'ud. So every mufti, the Salaf, will have lots of good fatwa and some fatwa that are weird. Like Sayyidina Umar is saying that tayammum cannot take the place of ghusl. So if you don't have water, you just don't pray for like months. Like imagine you live in a village in the middle of nowhere, right? And there's no rain for months and you need to keep the water for drinking. You just don't make ghusl and don't pray. That was his fatwa. Don't pray. Right? So over time, the people rejected that position, even though he was saying Umar. It doesn't matter. They just rejected it. Right? So there's lots of issues there. The position existed. It got edited out, right? Over time. Great. What about this diagram? So maturity of ideas and authority are very similar. So it's kind of like this diagram. It's like authority is one thing. Maturity of ideas is a similar issue. It is maturity of ideas results in authority. But what about this? What's this? Purity of original thought.
Original thought gets refined as we understand more about the
Mhm.
world.
So the original thought gets refined, becomes much more mature, right? That thought. So Abdullah ibn Amr, in Abdullah ibn Umr's head, there's an idea. Someone else takes it, rolls with it, follows it, it becomes more authoritative and becomes more mature. When you said this, you meant this. You're right. You have an idea, and like democracy, like the idea of democracy, it matured over time, right? Like it developed different forms of democracies and ideas of democracies, right? But now when you're thinking about democracy today, is that an original thought? It's not. It's not original, right? So someone's promoting democracy today. That's not an original thought. So the purity, how completely original is that? It's not. So it decreases over time. Okay, but it also becomes more mature than the nature. What is democracy and the nuances of it, etc. Does it ever reach rock bottom though? Like there's no, or the way you're thinking is totally copy and paste. Does it ever reach rock bottom? No, because nobody is not thinking, right? Nobody is not thinking, right? So there's a difference there, right?
Yes.
Okay, so there's a difference between nobody thinks anymore. That's not true. As opposed to that's not super original, right? So a lot of these, so now in fiqh, you might deal with somewhat less original ideas, but it's not non-original. But the maturity of the ideas, they're more refined, right? So Ibn Abbas would be, quote, ill-equipped to answer the question of Bitcoin, whereas Mufti Taqi Uthmani would be well-equipped to answer the question of Bitcoin. Why? You can quote me on this. Ibn Abbas would be ill-equipped to answer the question of Bitcoin, whereas Ibn Mufti Taqi Uthmani, right, the Grand Mufti of Pakistan, I'm not sure is he the Grand Mufti of Pakistan? Anyway, we all know his role in Islamic finance. Mufti Taqi Uthmani in Islamic finance, he's well equipped. Why? Is it because Ibn Abbas didn't live in the modern era? Or is it because Mufti Taqi lives at the end of the civilization as opposed to the beginning of the civilization?
But it's because he's living at the end of civilization.
Right? Muhammad Shoman is way better than Turing at doing coding, even though Turing's super intelligent and basically invented computers. Does that make sense? So because Muhammad
Yes.
Shoman, he can just go like, yeah, I mean, like right now, within 5 minutes, like Google, how do I do this? There's all these videos on how you solve this one problem and does it. So he's benefiting from, right, from being at the end of the civilization, not because the person at the beginning of the civilization couldn't do that. So Sayyidina Adam is ill-equipped to making dud pati. Forgive my pronunciation, all of the speakers. How do you pronounce it?
दूध पत्ती.
Thank you. Why is Sayyidina Adam ill-equipped to do that? Is he incapable? Sayyidina Adam incapable of is he less talented than us?
Because he's the beginning of civilization.
Thank you very much. We're at the end. So I already have the idea of milking cows. I already have the idea of growing tea, boiling tea, right? How to make tea, right? So the potential is all there, but so the originality of the thought. So when you're making, right, the originality of the thought of Dudpati is not very original, but maturity is there, right? And you're going to have different types of chai, for example, right? All I know in Urdu is up chai banai. That's what I know. Okay, makes sense, guys? These big ideas
Yes.
make sense? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Well, what about this quote here? Ibn Qutayba. Did we do this? Did we talk about this? Not sure we did. I'm pretty sure we did do this. We did.
Yeah, we did
Yeah. So
go through
what did he
info
say?
table. Well, it was about
Is the Islamic a civilization it's characterized by taqlid, blind following, and deification
no,
of certain scholars?
no, his introduction was basically about critical thinking.
Critical thinking.
Like,
So is critical thinking part of our tradition?
yes, definitely, yes.
Right. Do we blindly follow anybody in an absolute sense because of who they are?
No,
Right.
and
Do I
no
actually,
error.
so case in point, I never quote Imam Shafi'i on anything, not in hadith, and not in fiqh, and not in usul. That's just tangible evidence. If you just go through how many times here is a Shafi'i answering questions, if that were the case, that we blindly follow Imam Shafi'i, I'd be quoting, hey, I'm just gonna take it 1 second. You take these guys back to their mum. Put that right underneath my chair. Hey, go, go. Where's mum? Where's your mum gone? So if that were the case, I'd be quoting Imam Shafi all the time, but I'm not. If a Hanafi was doing taqleed of Imam Abu Hanifa, they'd be quoting Imam Hanifa all the time, but they don't. Right? We have never heard of Allah, mighty and majestic, ever making any mortal human infallible or immune to error. Right? Apart from a prophet, of course. Right? Nor have we ever heard of him favoring a particular group of people with knowledge over another. Nor has he made one particular era in history a time of knowledge and not the other. Right? It's not the case. But rather, what does he say? He says, rather, he has made knowledge something shared among his slaves. It's a continual process. You are actually, when you study a madhab, you are part of the ijtihad process. You are a continuation of that thought process, right? The lesser correcting the greater, the later reviving the knowledge by critiquing the words of the earlier. You're part of the process, right? Etc. Okay, so that was all that. We spoke about all of these things, and inshallah, the big ideas are all there. And now we want to go on to oh yeah, another one thing. Mentioned key quotes. Right. Abu Ishaq, we mentioned this quote here. Where is it? Our colleagues, yeah, so mention these key quotes. Abu Ishaq says, they're only labeled Shafis because they follow the methodology in legal reason. He said that. So Shafis are not blind followers of Imam Shafi. So the Shafis, they just blindly followed Imam Shafi, even though Imam Shafi didn't know everything. It's not true. The Shafi school is the net product of this school, right? Okay, so now history of the school. Let's go into specifics, okay? So we have like 10 minutes to go through this. So now we go into the specifics. We're not talking about the big ideas anymore. So it says, so stage number 1, we've got basically 10 stages here, okay? So we have the Proto-Hanafi, Proto-Maliki, Proto-Meccan schools. Then we have the Hanafi, Maliki, and Meccan schools. They produce Imam Shafi'i. So Imam Shafi'i is a product of these things. These are a product of the Sahaba and Tabi'in. Okay? So this is fairly nebulous, right? This is fairly getting a bit clearer, and they produce Imam Shafi'i. Then Imam Shafi'i is the founder of reductive fiqh. We'll talk about that in a second, inshallah. Then we get what we call the old school, al-qawl al-qadim. Then we get the new school, al-qawl al-jadid. And then we get narrations and new initiates, people being trained into this system. Then we get huge expansion of the school. Then a period of editing, and then period of refinement. So there's basically 10 stages that created the school, as we know it today. So I'm not going to talk about Imam Shafi. Imam Shafi's total, wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, lots of amazing things, and very human as well. You know, read his diwan, quotes. He went through a lot of pain in life and lots of difficulties. Amazing person, but we don't have time to talk about all of these things. So Imam Shafi, the student. So he's born in 150, right? So he's born about 140 years after the Prophet passed away, right? So that's a long time, right? So put a timeline. He's born in the year that Imam Hanifa dies, right? So Imam Abu Hanifa is 80 to 100, born in the year 80 and dies in the year 150, right? Totally different era. So Imam Abu Hanifa is born in the time of the Umayyads and passes away in the beginning of the Abbasids. Imam Shafi'i is born in the beginning of the Abbasids. He's in the golden era of the Abbasids, right? Totally new world, right? The Ummah has now cut in half for the first time, right? Well, not for the, I guess it cut in time between Sayyidina Ali and Sayyidina Muawiyah, but after that, after the Umayyads, the Ummah was one from basically near Pakistan. They weren't really into India yet, but in Pakistan, all the way to North Africa and Spain was one. And then the Ummah cut in half with the Abbasid revolution in 131. And the Ummah then was cut in half and was never united ever again. Right? So the Ummah is already cut in half. Studies with the Meccans. He studies with the Medinans like Imam Malik, and he studies with the Kufans. But Imam Malik is his main teacher, and that's his sahib. That's his. He calls him. That's his main tutor, right? So that's we're going to see that Shafi school is very much Maliki, more Maliki than it is Hanafi. And he studies with the Kufans like Imam Muhammad, the student of Imam Abu Hanifa. So Imam Shafi, yes, he studied with the Hanafi school. Yes, he studied with the Meccans, but he is more Maliki, and there's lots of Maliki DNA or Madani DNA in the Shafi school, right? So that's why I'm putting it here, this side of the diagram, right? And then the Hanbali school, Imam Ahmad is a student of Imam Shafi, right? So he keeps referring to Imam Malik as our teacher and your teacher. Our teacher, Imam Malik. Your teacher, Imam Abu Hanifa. Right? So he's more Maliki than he is Hanafi. Many substantive and conceptual similarities with the Maliki school. So for me as a Shafi'i, picking up, it's like, again, I studied law in England and I'm practiced in Pakistan. Pretty easy. Same legal system. Some differences here and there. Not a big deal. Right? You studied law in Jordan and you practice in France. Same legal system. Not a problem. Because they're just minor differences here and there. Right? Whereas I'm studying, I studied law in England, I'm practicing in America. Oh, or I studied law in England and I practice in France. Major differences. The legal systems are not the same at all. Right? Major differences. You're gonna have serious, you probably have to start from scratch, basically, or I don't know what you're gonna do. You know. So me picking up a Maliki fiqh book, easy. Me picking up a Hanafi fiqh book, I don't know. I'm lost, right? Okay, so founder of reductive fiqh. So what did he do then? So Imam Shafi'i, he studies with all these different systems and he comes up with the reductive fiqh. What does reductive mean?
Reduce things to the essentials.
So what he's going to say is he's going to come up with a fiqh system that uses less sources than everybody else. Okay, and he's going to say what is not a proof. Okay. So imagine, for example, somebody, you're a teenager and you got into a lot of trouble, and now you're going to have a reductive social life, meaning there's certain people I realize I don't need to be around. I'm actually going to be more selective of who am I going to let into my life and who I'm going to let influence me, right? Because there's just too many influences. Got confused, right? So Imam Shafi does the same thing, looking at all the different madhahib and how they work. And he's like, well, you have a certain way of functioning. The certain sources of law that you use are not right. So he asks really important questions, right? Nisful ilmi husn su'al, as they say. Half of knowledge is asking the right question. So he is the first person to ask questions. What are the sources of law? Everyone else is doing that naturally, but he is the first person to formally do that and write on that. What are the sources of law? And what are not the sources of law? And if these are the sources of law, what are the linguistic tools that we can use to objectively process revelation? So then he's using linguistics, grammar, right? A very important question, to what extent can we think for Allah? To what extent can we think for Allah? Right? Lots of these very good questions. So he comes up and he says, there are 4 sources of law only, right? Like this Maliki school, they something have like 17 sources of law. right? The Shafi'is, only 4. Right? Just 4 sources of law. The Quran itself. The Sunnah, and then you ask the question, what is the Sunnah? He defines what the Sunnah is as well. Scholarly consensus and analogy. These are the 4 things, nothing else. So when he says Sunnah, he means the words and the actions of the Prophet ﷺ himself. So you will find the other madhahib, particularly the Malikis and the Hanafis, they will use the fatawa and the actions of the Sahaba and Sahaba and to some extent Tabi'een as legislative evidence. How do I know this is halal? Ibn Abbas said it was. How do I know this is haram? Ibn Umar said it was. How do I know this is sunnah? Abdullah ibn Ibrahim Nakhai used to do it. Okay, so this idea of Imam al-Shafi'i is the key idea that comes into the Salafi mind. And it creates 6 books as well. The 6 books are not created by Imam Shafi'i, but are greatly affected by Imam Shafi'i. Why is it when I open the 6 books, they only mention the words and the actions of the Prophet ﷺ, whereas previously you would mention what the Prophet ﷺ did and what the Sahaba and Tabi'een did? So you look at the author, the teachers of the 6 books, Imam Ahmad may be an exception, but let's say Abdul Razzaq Sana'ani. He has a huge book filled with hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ and Sahaba and Tabi'een. All of this is legislative. All of this is a basis. All of this is sunnah. Sunnah is what the Prophet ﷺ did and the Sahaba and Tabi'een. That's sunnah. Right? It is sunnah to pray Taraweeh, and it's sunnah to pray in a group prayer, and it's sunnah to pray 20 rak'ahs. Why? Sahaba and Tabi'een. Right? Whereas Imam Shafi'i, he says, the words of the Prophet ﷺ himself and the actions of the Prophet ﷺ himself, not the Sahaba and Tabi'een. That's not a proof of they're not prophets. There's only one prophet. Right? So it's the key distinction. So for example, Imam Malik, he says, when it is raining, you can pray Maghrib and Isha and join Maghrib and Isha because of rain in a masjid. Why do we do that? That's what Ibn Umar used to do. Okay? Imam Shafi'i says, well, you just quoted the hadith that Ibn Abbas said the Prophet ﷺ joined Dhuhr and Asr and Maghrib and Isha. So why are you limiting it to Maghrib and Isha when the hadith says Dhuhr and Asr and Maghrib and Isha? So Imam Shafi'i says that's invalid. You can't do that. You can't restrict a hadith based on what the Sahabi did. You know, Imam Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, he said that the Prophet ﷺ said, if a dog licks from your bowl, wash it 7 times. But he himself did it maybe 3 times. So should I go with the action of Abu Hurairah, or should I go with the hadith that Abu Hurairah is quoting? Imam Shafi says you go with the hadith that he's quoting. Hanafis, they say no, you don't have to do that, right? If a Sahabi quotes a hadith and does opposite, that means you should follow him in his understanding of the hadith, right? Imam Shafi says he's not a prophet. He's not a prophet. There's no consensus. It's not in the Quran. There's no analogy. Judgment Day, I'm responsible for following the Prophet and not anybody else. Right?
Yeah,
So
can I ask a question?
Go ahead, Bismillah.
How does Imam Shafi understand then situations where Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw a Sahabi do something, and then we derive a principle from it? For example, the story of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam asking Bilal radiallahu anhu, "Oh Bilal, I hear your footsteps in Jannah," and he says, "Oh, I do 2 rakah wudu after pray 2 rakah after making wudu." So how that is something that a Sahabi did, not Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did. So how would Imam Shafi understand that?
Yeah, so in the Shafi'i school, we have a concept of bid'ah hasana. Why? Because we say Sayyidina Bilal praying, voluntarily inventing 2 rakahs of wudu, inventing that is something that you can do in the Sharia. So because we don't make the Sahaba and Tabi'een legislative, their actions legislative, we see that their inventions, their bid'ah, were all bid'ah hasana, were all good inventions. For someone like the Malikis would say the Sahaba and Tabi'een, they are legislative. You can't invent something after them. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So basically, that's why the Shafi school, we're the most open school for concept of bid'ah. The idea of a bid'ah is like very open in the Shafi school. Whereas in the other madhahib, it's much more narrow because they say if it's not from the Sahaba and Tabi'een, khalas, it's wrong. You know? Does that make sense? So for the Shafis, for example, things like the Hadara, things like the Mawlid, that's like, yeah, it's just dhikr, it's just another form of dhikr, it's fine. Whereas for the Malikis and Hanafis, I don't know really about the Hanbalis, it's a bit more confusing, but for them, they're like, no, this is like if the Sahaba and Tabi'in didn't do it, then it's a bid'ah. Then it's not welcome. Because basically they can legislate, but we can't. Whereas Imam Shafi says they can't legislate. What are you talking about? Only the Prophet can legislate. So if they invented something, you can invent something. Why not? Like, there's no difference. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So I'm just speaking at high level. I'm not talking about specifics here. So in principle, the Shafis don't really have a dalil for 20 rakats of Taraweeh. Like, we don't really have it because it's not established the Prophet did that. That is the Shafi school. So again, I'm talking about on a high level. But on a high level, we don't really have a proof. Like, there's no. It's kind of interesting. Like, why do the Shafi say 20 rakats, right? But if you look at the other madhahib, like if you're a Maliki, they say in Medina they pray 20 rakats, khalas. That is now sunnah, right? So as a Hanafi, they say the Sahaba and Tabi'in, they're all praying 20 plus, khalas, you can't not do that. Anything that the Sahaba and Tabi'in all did, you have to do, right? Whereas for the Shafi'is, I mean, if there's consensus, fine, but there's not consensus. And, so it's actually that's what I mean reductive. Like, what you're actually accepting as proof is very limited. Okay. Yes to uncorroborated hadith cited by reliable sources. So here's a hadith. No one is corroborating what you're saying, but you're reliable, and your teacher is reliable, and his teacher is reliable, and his teacher is reliable. Khalas, that's a proof. It doesn't have to be corroborated. It is not a problem that you, Imam Malik, have never heard this hadith. So for Imam Malik, his approach is like this. If you come from Kufa, or you come from Sham, or you come from Central Asia with a hadith that I've never heard of, it's wrong. How do I know it's wrong? Because I'm in Medina, and the deen has been preserved in Medina. So if it goes against what they do in Medina, it's wrong by definition. I really don't care what it is. Imam Malik used to say, people will take a hadith from us as an inch and bring it back as a yard. Like we're the source. Medina is the source. So a hadith of Imam Malik, if that hadith is not known in Medina, that's a proof that it's wrong. For Imam Shafi, it's like, no, there could be a hadith that's known in Damascus that's not known in Kufa or Medina. It happens, right? So it's a very different way of looking at things, right? So for Imam, the Hanafis as well, they have this kind of idea that hadith that's not well known by the first or second generation, it's not a hadith. You can't base fiqh on it, right? Whereas for the Shafi, it's like, well, it could be, it's slightly different, right? So Imam Shafi is famous for saying, like, if the hadith comes from Iraq or comes from, I don't know, and I don't know it, it happens. That kind of thing happens where people don't know hadiths, right? Uncorroborated, no one else backed it up. So there's no corroborating evidence for it. There's nobody else that backs it up, but that's enough. The fact that you said it and you're reliable and your teacher's reliable, khalas, that's enough. You don't need to be, it doesn't need to be backed up by evidence. Like it itself, the fact that you are reliable, your teacher's reliable, his teacher's reliable, according to the Prophet ﷺ, that's enough. That's a proof, right? So uncorroborated, an alternative piece of information to prove that point, right? As long as you have a sanad, even if you don't have another sanad, even if you don't have another fatwa, even if that's enough, right? Reliability, we discussed that in hadith, right? Who's a reliable narrator, etc. So Imam Shafi'i then, his voice empowers, he is the spokesman of muhaddithin, because that's what they deal with. They deal with hadiths, And it's like, oh my God, suddenly my merchandise, what I have is valuable, right? So he's like the spokesman. He's called Nasir al-Sunnah, the spokesman of hadith. No to the fatwa of Sahaba and Tabi'een, theoretically. Theoretically. In practice, Sahaba and Tabi'een are used all the time in the Shafi school, but theoretically, no, it is not a proof, right? No to weak hadiths, including the mursal hadith. So the mursal hadith is when, for example, one of the Tabi'een, when the early Muslims says the Prophet said. So Imam Shafi says, were you a witness? Were you an eyewitness? Were you there when the Prophet said these words? No. Okay, it's not a hadith then. Because you're not an eyewitness and you're not even quoting the source of the eyewitness. So you're just saying, I'm an early Muslim, I saw Sahaba, right? And so now I'm going to quote the Prophet, right? And so the Malikis, they will use a hadith like that. Hanafis, they will use a hadith like that, right? I trust you. I don't know what your source is, but I trust you. Imam Shafi says, I don't know what your source is, we can't be trusted. So again, the 6 books will not, well, Bukhari and Muslim will not have a mursal hadith in it. They won't do that. It's now considered weak. Whereas according to according to the Hanafis and Malikis, it's not considered weak. So you see how the Shafi school basically hijacked the whole of hadith. Not intentionally, but they defined the definition of sahih. So now, as a Hanafi, you have a weak hadith to prove your point. Who defined what weak is and what sound is? The Shafi'is. So can you see that's why it's important to understand that? Is to understand that the idea of weak hadith, that when you say this hadith is weak, that's not an absolute statement. It's a relative statement. Trump has decided that that Greenland needs to be taken over by United States of America, right? That's how he's decided, right? It needs to be taken over for the sake of the West. America needs to take over Greenland, right? Needs to, for the sake of, these are relative statements, right? Assuming Trump is a moral person with high, goals to protect the West from the evil, other things. Even if to put the assumptions there, that's a relative statement. China is going to take Greenland. Russia is going to take Greenland. So they are going to do that, or they may do that. When you say need, so when you say this hadith is weak, according to whose standards? So the Shafi'is basically, they define the standards. So now everyone has to answer to the Shafi'is, which is not really fair, is it? Because it's one way of doing things, one valid, valuable way of doing things, not the way of doing things. So just another 2 minutes.
Sheikh,
Go ahead.
do we define the exceptions for when we use the fatwa of the Sahaba and Tabi'een and when we use the weak hadith?
Theoretically, no. In practice, yes. So this is the difference between theory and practice, and the gap between theory and practice is one of the reasons why you need to be trained. Because someone's going to come along and use an oversimplified version of your system and abuse it. It's not like that. Does that make sense? So that's one of these things that when you said, for example, when Ibn Khaldun saying is you need to be trained, if you're not trained, you'll become a robot and you won't function properly. So you see the gap when you see the gap between Imam Shafi's usul and his application of the usul, you suddenly realize, oh my God, this is quite a complex system. It's not chaotic, but it's complex. Does that make sense?
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we'll talk about this inshallah next week. Okay, so we have this picture here. So no to weak hadiths, right? But do the Shafis use weak hadiths all the time? No to the Sahaba and Tabi'een in principle, but do we use it? Yes, we do. Hence, for example, 20 rakahs of Taraweeh, right? As an example, right? Yes to Sahih hadiths. Do the Shafis follow every single Sahih hadith? No, they don't. Okay, well, I thought you just said you follow Sahih hadith. Yeah, but we don't follow every single Sahih hadith. Nobody does. Right? There's a difference between the theory and the practice. It's not as simple as that. Right? Does that make sense, inshallah?
Yes.
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 Right? So even when you say no to the fatwa Sahaba and Tabi'in, isn't Imam Shafi trained by the students of the Tabi'in? Like he's student of Imam Malik, Imam Muhammad, and these people are right. So that's kind of contrary to what we just saw, that is a natural extension, right? We're talking about theoretically. In theory, can a Sahabi legislate? No. Right? There's a difference between what someone can do in theory and what happens in practice, right? It's not really the same thing, right? In theory, whose opinion counts? The surgeon or the nurse? The surgeon, right? But in practice, the nurse might say something and the surgeon's like, hang on, what did you say? So good point. Let's check that. Oh my God, thank you very much, right? Sometimes the nurse knows more than the surgeon, right? But in theory, there's a hierarchy of decisions that are made, and it is not the right of the nurse to make certain decisions without the person above them. And then there's a whole hierarchy, right? That's in theory, but in practice, it's a bit more complex than that, right? In theory, when we talk about physics, right? We're dealing with physics or mechanics. We talk about the center of gravity, right? Isn't it a bit more complex than that? Like there's a center of gravity. We treat an object, right? Here's my phone, and I treat it as if it has a dot in the middle of it, which is called a center. That's not true, though, is it? So in reality, when I'm talking about gravitational force, it's a bit more complex than that. Because it isn't a dot. Like in math, we simplify things, right? We do models, right? So a model is not reality, though. So there's a big difference between a model or a theory and then the practice. And that's where training comes in. You need to be trained in order to do this. There's a big difference in what it says in the fiqh book and the fatwa, right? Because here's reality of the person. Here's reality of the person. Big gap. You have to be trained to give fatwa because there's a difference in what it says in the book. The textbook answer versus the answer is not the same. Because I'm dealing with people. And they're not that simple. Make sense, inshallah?
Yes, Sheikh.
Yes.
Yeah. Bismillah, go ahead.
Will it be correct to say that the Shafi madhab is more dependent on hadith than the other three madhab? Based on that, no?
Shafi and Hanbali, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So if you did dependence, so the Maliki and Hanafi school has heavy dependence on Sahaba and Tabi'in, or very heavy. The Shafi school has a heavy dependence on Sahaba and Tabi'in. Even though we just said you don't follow the Sahaba and Tabi'in in principle, it has a heavy dependence on Sahaba and Tabi'in. Whereas the Maliki and Hanafi has a very heavy dependence. So this is why you get confused. You read the 6 books and you get confused as a Maliki and a Hanafi. What is you missing? You didn't realize the Fatawa Sahaba and Tabi'in and how important they were.
I see. Jazakallah khairan.
Whereas usually a Shafi'i, a superficial Shafi'i and Hanbali will quite easily read the 6 books and kind of know what's going on. A superficial one. In reality, it's much more complex than that. Reality is much more. There's the dependence of the Shafi'i school and the Hanbali school on the Sahaba and Tabi'in is high. And that's the difference between a Salafi and a Madhabi. A Madhab is actually built on the Sahaba and Tabi'in. Whereas a Salafi is not. You're not actually. That's why Salafi is going to question Taraweeh. Right? Because he says he's not based on the Sahaba and Tabi'in, he's based on the Hadith. There's no Sahih Hadith that says 20 rak'ahs. So he's going to say, why am I even doing that? So why is it the four madhahib agree on 20 rak'ahs, but the Salafi doesn't? Because he's not actually following Sahaba and Tabi'in. So the four madhahib, it's either heavy reliance or very heavy reliance on Sahaba and Tabi'in in reality. But it's like, of all the madhahib, the Shafi'i school is the least heavy reliance on the Sahaba and Tabi'in. And then the Hanbali school, and then the Hanafi school, and then the Maliki school. Maliki school is the heaviest reliance on the Sahaba and Tabi'in. It is, for them, that is the definition of the deen. What the Tabi'in of Medina did is the definition of the deen. That defines halal haram. خير إن شاء الله. We'll stop here. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.
جزاكم الله خيرا.
وإياكم.
Assalamu alaikum.
وعليكم السلام.
Sheikh,
I have to run, Arias. Sorry, I've got to have another class.
okay.